our introduction, I'm Geeta and this is Jasmeet, and the reason I'm introducing us is because everyone gets confused with us. Okay, so, and we're going to put up, can we have the picture please? Okay, we'll wait for that. This is Bhutan. This is a gorgeous place, and it's actually a country, and we all know it's a tiny little country that's nestled between India and China. And there are two things about Bhutan that we really admire. One is the fact that it manages to keep its identity and its culture intact. And the second thing, of course, is the National Happiness Index that everyone is talking about now, which is really something that the King of Bhutan put forth, where he said that the GDP was not an adequate measure for prosperity, and one needed to look at happiness and wellness as well. And in the global discourse now, this whole idea has got traction. And the United Nations in 2011 passed a resolution, which it called the Happiness Resolution, which pretty much echoed what the King of Bhutan said. So really what we're looking at is an alternative paradigm for development. The Happiness Index is an alternative paradigm for development. I'm sure a lot of people in the audience and happiness and contentment. And a lot of our speakers have talked about it today. And I think it becomes really important when you're building something to create something where people are happy and they come there and they feel a sense of joy being in that part. And I think it's something Jasmeet and me have believed in, built in, and lived by today.
Yeah, Geeta, in fact, do you remember when we set up Third Eye 18 years ago, you just come back from a holiday in Bhutan?
Yeah, that's true. And I never knew that 18 years later I'd be standing in a podium in front of so many people and talking about Bhutan. Well, but in any case, I think getting back to the point, Jasmeet and I built this company, the Third Eye, 18 years ago, and we adopted an alternative paradigm for business building. And that paradigm really was feminine energy. We built it in a time when it was counterintuitive to even be a woman. And I think Priyadarshini talked about how there's the whole alpha male aggression. The corporate boardrooms are much more about men. We also had a statistic about how women, as they reach the top, the numbers get fewer. The whole paradigm was much more about, being much more male. And I think Jasmeet and I, when we set the business, knew we wanted to do something different, and we wanted to do it differently. So in a culture that valued aggression, really, we put in nurturance. In a culture that was about IQ, we brought in EQ. In a culture that was about competition, we brought collaboration. And I think we changed the whole essence. And we like to call it the sari culture. In a world that was about suits, we actually created the sari culture. And I think the sari culture worked really well for us, and that really is at the heart of our story. And we have a really simple story to tell about how we grew and what we did. But I think it's the sari that made us who we are. And of course, I'm not wearing a sari, that's the point as well. But I think it's the sari that made us who we are, and it took us away from the classical framework. And it made us successful as well. So at one level, it made us sensitive. At another level, it made us successful. And what is it that we as sari built? The sari culture really moved us away from not just building a company, but building a community and a culture. And I think, and also moving away from the classical framework of revenues to relationships. And I think this is what women do really well. You don't just build an organization, but you build a culture, you build a community, and most importantly, you build relationships. You look at revenue. It's not to say you don't look at revenue, but what you have and what endures really is relationships. And I think we've done a good job in it, haven't we?
Yeah, in fact, this relationship versus just the revenue approach that we followed as women extends to our clients as well. We've had some long-standing relationships. Some of our client relationships go as far back as 15 years. And often we've become the brand custodians because brand teams have come and gone, and we've really handed the baton over to them. It's not to say that we're praising ourselves, but it's just the long-standing relationships that we've had with them that has allowed us to do that. And of course, this relationship extends internally as well. Most of our employees have been with us from the time we started out. And in fact, is my mic?
Yeah, it's working, it's working.
So some of them have been with us from the time we started, and we are 18 years old today. We're 45 people strong, and in an industry that's characterized by attrition, we've lost only 5 people in all these years.
And of which 2 actually went on to have babies, so that's not even classical attrition, is it?
Yeah. So we've actually, over the years, what's happened is that the community has grown, the relationships has strengthened. And what's at the cornerstone of this community is the fact that there's basic trust and faith. And therefore, like Geeta was saying earlier, there is a collaborative versus a competitive spirit in the organization. It comes not just to us as women, but it's something that's percolated in the culture of the organization today. So you often have people bailing each other out, helping each other out, putting their own work aside to take somebody else's work on because that's more important at that point in time. And while adjustment and accommodation is something that comes naturally to us as women, today the entire organization is built on that. It's not to say that we are only women in the organization. So this is the spirit of the community, and that's how a community works, because this accommodation and adaptation happens willingly. There's no grudge to it. The other thing, isn't that true, Geeta?
That's true, yeah.
And the other thing that happens actually in this spirit of community is the fact that there's an underlying essence of democracy. So of course everybody is allowed to say what they want to, but even the youngest members of the team have their say, their opinions are taken on board, and this spirit of democracy actually extends to even the small little things that we do. I remember a few years ago we moved to a new office, and we were building a wall. We had this center wall in the office, and we wanted to do that interestingly. Remember that all that democracy and what it led to?
Because we were all really excited because we were young and we'd got this nice office and everyone was excited about moving to a new office from all these little holes that we'd worked in before. And this wall was like central, and we wanted to give it character and we wanted to do it aesthetically. So of course, like Jasmeet said, we were democratic, so we left it open to vote. We were 20 of us then, everyone had a point of view. So it took 2 months, like all democracies, to come up with some kind of consensus. And of course, there was a lot of, arguments and all the rest of it. But
and a very irate interior decorator who was tearing his hair out in the process.
Because he was getting really annoyed and saying, man, it's only a wall. But of course, the wall came up. And it was a great looking wall. It had color, it had graffiti, there was lots of character. And we were very excited because we think it reflected us. And of course, it was, aesthetically lovely. But I think more important than the aesthetics of the wall was really the process with which we built the wall, or we painted the wall, or we decorated the wall, call it what you may. And I think the process, like Jasmeet said, was collaborative. Everyone came together. It was, a joint effort. And the nice thing was the fact that it didn't only look good and people felt good. More importantly, there was a sense of ownership. Everyone in the office felt that they owned a part of that wall and that wall belonged to them. And I think that is the most fantastic part of being a democracy. And I know that in our country it's abused in many different ways. But finally, at the end of the day, everyone feels that they own it. And I think it's this sense of ownership and this sense of community that becomes fundamental when we believe women build organizations. This is no offense to any men in the audience, because I'm sure you'd build it like that. But I think it's the feminine energy that brings this alive. And this sense of community that you have, in any community, people want to belong. So you don't just go to work because it's an office. You go to work because it's a community. You like to go to work. We've been told very often that people who come to work don't have Monday morning blues. I'd like to believe that, I'm sure, so would Jasmeet. And I think they have a great time working. They enjoy what they do. They have fun doing it. And research is a really hard business. We have very long hours, and sometimes, you have an irate client at the other end. And sometimes it can be unrewarding professionally in terms of the work you do. But I think the environment that we have is very rewarding personally for them, and they all have a good time. And if the noise levels and the laughter is anything to go by in office, they're really, really having a good time.
We have a very,
noisy office, yeah. And somebody joined us last year actually from a very large corporate, and he said something very interesting. And note that I'm saying he, so we have quite a lot of men who work with us now. He said, in the kind of setup you guys have built, there can be a lot of tiredness because, it's physically exhausting, but there's never tiredsomeness. So I think this difference between tiredness and tiredsomeness really embodies the essence of what we built as women, and as bringing in really the feminine energy and really operating from the right side of the brain and not the left side of the brain. This is not to say that we don't have a left side. We do, of course. We're doing numbers and we're doing revenue, but our right side is much more dominant.
Yeah, so we've really built the organization differently. And what's the other hallmark of this different organization is that like other communities, we have elders versus just leaders. And as elders, therefore, we've not been classic bosses. We've been more like mentors to our people. And we encourage them, we guide them, we advise them versus just instructing them. Because instructionally, it becomes a very, top-down kind of an approach, and that equality and that flat organization that we build doesn't happen. And even this mentoring, this guiding, this sometimes counseling approach is very, very feminine, and it comes naturally to us. And that's what has become the culture of our organization. And therefore, if you look back, actually, if you see, 18 years ago, we went about doing something that's called life coaching today, but it's something that was a term that was not even known then. But it's the essence of which, it's the essence that we've used to take our organization forward. And what else this mentoring and nurturing kind of an approach has done is that it has fostered creativity. It has allowed people to think out of the box. And in our business, innovation, creativity is very important because it's allowed us to take out new products, build new methodologies, and therefore it's also helped us take the business forward.
Yeah, and I think the North Star in all this has really been our feminine energy, right, Jasmeet?
Yeah, and in this framework of feminine energy, we've really been guided by intuition versus just intellect. Intuition actually guides us in a lot of work that we do, and it's most visible in the way we hire. So we hire actually what we call on chemistry and connection versus just on resumes. So it's not to say that resumes and CVs don't matter. Of course they matter. We get CVs, we get resumes, we look at them. But what really we seek is a fit in the culture and the organization of this community that we built. I remember this time when we got this really fancy resume. It really blew our minds. And when Geeta and I met that person, we realized intuitively that the person wouldn't fit into our organization. Not to take away from that person's credentials. The resume was very impressive. I'm sure that person would have done excellently in another organization. But that person had a much more left-brained approach, and we felt that that person will not be able to fit into our organization. So we chose to give that very impressive resume a miss.
Yeah, and interesting, like Jasmeet is saying, in this culture of chemistry and, connection and compatibility, and I always tell Jasmeet it's a bit like a love marriage, because if you're not compatible, then, no matter how competent you are and how well you can make chai, it doesn't work. So I'm saying that we have all these wonderful people, and we've collected actually a very because we're not only resume driven, we've collected a very diverse bunch of people. We have people who are, filmmakers, we have a creative writer, we have a sociologist, we have folk from business school, and all of them come together not just because they love the whole framework of consumer discovery, and of course they love what they do, but more importantly because they buy into this whole culture. They buy into the fact that this is about a community, and they add back to that relationship. And what we find interesting is, while Jasmeet and I set it up as two women, we have a lot of men who work with us, and they thrive really well in this culture. They don't feel threatened. And this is not to say that, I was asking Jasmeet once whether we should be hiring high on empathy, low on testosterone men, but that's not the way it is. We have very males who work with us, and they seem perfectly happy doing it. And we've also used intuition in another way, because I think sometimes as women, you can take, some really important business decisions on intuition, and they've worked. In fact, 15 years ago when Jasmeet and I were just setting up, we had this very large multinational that wanted us to align ourselves to them and work with them. And of course, it meant huge spurt in revenues. It meant lots, healthy top line, bottom line. But Jasmeet and I also knew that somewhere we would actually be giving up on this culture. We would become corporate. We would become revenue focused, not just relationship focused. And we said no. And I think we were very brave. We were a little worried, at that point saying no, but we still said it. And everyone around us thought we were really foolish to actually say no to something like this. But I think at that point it didn't feel right. And sometimes as women, it doesn't feel right. And I think a lot of women are scared to go with their gut, but I would say go with it because it works. And it worked for us because 15 years later, now when we look back at that decision, it's fantastic because we've grown the way that we wanted to grow. We've created something that we wanted to create. The world has incidentally recognized us. I don't think we ever did it seeking our 5 minutes of fame, except Saloni putting the spotlight on us. Okay, so that's really, I think we've done it and we've done it well. And I think we've built an organization with a difference. I think we've built feminine energy and we've built it well.
Yeah. And it's not been easy to build from the heart, actually. There have been challenges, so it's not to say that the ride up here was all easy. We set up just the two of us from a small hole, not a hole actually, but a small apartment in Bandra. We worked from home. And I remember on those days, I had a little son who would stay up at night with us. He was our only thing. And, but at that time, people actually thought that we will not be able to sustain this nurturing, this mentoring, this empathy-ridden culture, because in those days, in a structured and more hierarchical environment, they wondered whether, there was sustainability in this philosophy going forward. But we persisted because that was the only way we knew we could build, and that was the only thing that we thought worked for us. So there were challenges. There were times that were that we found it difficult to pull up people, because in this entire nurturing and mentoring kind of a place that we'd built up, it was difficult to give them negative strokes. There were times when we found it difficult to create discipline, because it was, in this whole, and there were some funny tags that came our way. People used to call us this gang of girls, because that time there were just some girls who were working, or this candle-making organization, or the Kejo culture. And I know Kejo sells, but people still looked at it and didn't say it very complimentarily. And in this whole hum saath hai vibe, they wondered whether, we will be able to go forward. But we found our balance, and today we think we've created a culture which is going to endure. And it's these yin, right-brained values that have brought us here, and we are confident that it's these very values that are going to take us forward. Don't you think so?
Yeah, I think so. And also, just quickly, I can see Saloni telling me that time is out, so I'm going to really make this short. In fact, now we have a lot of young people who come and work with us, And it's interesting because one of them told me, you know, you've created this postmodern culture. I really don't know what is so postmodern about it. We've just done what we did from our hearts. And I laugh and tell Jasmeet, you know, we are neither young nor postmodern. But the fact is that we've created something fundamentally, and it looks like it's an organization of the future. Quite, you know, by coincidence, I'm saying. I don't think we did it that intentionally. And sometimes in an introspective moment, Jasmeet and I ask ourselves whether we would do it differently if we were given another chance. I think we wouldn't change one thing about it.
No, not
we
even
would
a
do
dot.
it exactly, yeah, we would do it exactly the same way. And if I was to just leave you with one thought in terms of what is it that you need to take away from what we've told you today, it's really to look at an alternative paradigm of business building, because I'm sure there are lots of you here who are budding entrepreneurs and want to have a dream of doing something on their own. Really look at an alternative paradigm. Look at this feminine energy that is in us. It does not matter if you're a man or a woman, we all have it. This is between the yin and the yang. Look at the yin in us and see whether that can inspire us to build, and to build differently. You don't have to wear a sari to think like a sari. And I think that's the beauty of this thing. And, you know, and so when she and I built it, we know today that we've done it right. And like somebody said very nicely, if we can make a difference, to Srividya said, to one woman, I think we would have achieved a lot. And we're going to leave you with a clip, actually, which has inspired us ever since the film came out. And it's an antithesis to the Gordon Geckos and the Wall Streets of the world. It's a little clip from Little Miss Sunshine, which is our favorite film. And we think it talks about the different roads that people take to achieve differently. And we're just going to play that for you. Thank you.
Thank you.